So I'm going to play Not a Cage, which many of you know. Does anybody want to set it up and tell us what Not a Cage does, what it's about? Who dares to remember that from ModPo? Nobody's got the nerve to do that. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I will explain it, and then I'll play it, and then I'll give you a link to the text. Joan was getting rid of books from her bookshelf. She was, you know, I don't know, moving or cleaning out her house. I don't know. How many of you, just wave your hand if you have more books than you really can handle? And of course, Kim is actually, Kim, it's about to fall on you. My goodness. And Mary, there's a lot of books on your shelf. So how many, again, have more books than you know what to do with? People, yeah, good. And how many of you have had people say to you, what? You have so many books. Why do you need a new book? That's me anyway. We're bookie people. So she had too many books. And she decided to discard a bunch of them. So she put a box together and picked books off the shelf. So I'm going to ask someone at random to tell us what it's like to pick books to toss out. So let's see, I'm looking around for people who are paying attention. Ella, have you ever discarded books?
Yeah, I have. It's an incredibly painstaking, difficult process, which usually results in me just reading the book again, because
the ones you're about to get rid of?
Yeah, I have to validate as to why I'm getting rid of the book. I open it up and then there I am reading, and then nothing happens.
And that could not have been, Ella, a better introduction to this poem. Do you know the poem, Ella?
I don't. It's new to me. I haven't read it.
All right. Not a Cage would sound like a poem. It is dedicated to John Cage, her mentor. But it's not, the title does not come from John Cage. It was a random sentence from one of the books that she discarded. So she put the books out on the curb in a box. Then she felt really bad and guilty. So she decided, I'm going to touch each of these books before I let go of them. She knew that these are books she was not interested in, writers that didn't interest her. She was basically making a negative judgment. But as with Ella, feeling bad about making that judgment, decided to validate the negative judgment by opening each one of the books, by almost shamanistically touching each book before she said goodbye to them. And she chose the first line and the last line of each book she discarded and made a poem out of the first and last lines of each of those books. And one of the last lines was "not a cage," which is just too amazing. So it is an aleatory poem. That is to say, it is a poem of non-intentional chance operations. And so I'm going to play it for you, and then I'm going to put a link to the text, and then we'll just talk about what the heck she's doing, whether it's of value to you, whether you're interested in this kind of aleatory poetry, random poetry. It's clearly not about anything. It's about a box of books that she's discarding, written by poets and critics and fiction writers that she wasn't interested in. So here we go. Here's Joan Retallack.
Thing that I'm going to read is a poem dedicated to John Cage, which is called "Not a Cage," which is based on first and last lines from books that I was discarding or selling or giving away. I think as a way of assuaging my guilt for not having read them. I collected the beginnings and the endings. Scientific, sorry, I have two copies of this book here. It's not all fitting. Scientific inquiry, seen in a very broad perspective, may C. Foot, 1957. Also, Wettermark, 1906, chapter 13. To man seek, the world is twofold, in accordance with that witness is now or in the future. It wasn't until the waitress brought her Benedictine and she, Villandry, les douves, Parazé, le rideau, mine, yours, Cynthia, not a building, this earth, not a cage, the artist, disciple, abundant, multiple, restless, a forgery, opus, Loonus, Bellini, we named you. I thought the earth is possible. I could not tell to make live and conscious history in common and wake. You find yourself among and wake up deep in the fruit. Did you get the money we sent? I smell fire at full volume, stage dark. 1, Russia, 1927. God, say your prayers. You were begotten in a vague war, sidelong into your brain. In letter 3 and 4, as earlier, the narrator is North Dakota, Portugal, Moorhead, Minnesota. The lights go down, the curtain opens. The first thing we gun, Veronica wrote, the end, Wittgenstein. Tomorrow she would be in America. Over 40 years ago, a tense, cunningly moving tale by the hung. Then he moved on, and I went close behind. Interviewers. What drew a woman from Ohio to study in Tübingen? American readers with this issue, former subscribers to Marxist perspectives, the shadow of the coup continues to hover over Spain. In the ordinary way of summer, girls were singing like a saguaro cactus from which any desert wayfarer can draw, as is Mr. Fox, but in literature. 25 years have gone by. Ya sé, dijeron las cosas más oscuras. The most obscure things have already been said.
I put the link to the text in the chat, but my question to you all is, and I'll start with Denny, because Denny's always game. It doesn't make sense. There's no sequence. It's a random collection of lines, first and last lines. So what is it? It's a poem for sure, but what is it?
You're asking for a definition? Well,
I'm asking for your impression.
my impression, yeah, that's a different question. My impression was that somehow I honed in on a word that randomly came out, which had to do with forgery. And it made me think of the whole element of errata and mistakes. And I mean, so I don't know. I guess I was thinking about ideas of unoriginality or something from that mention of forgery.
Let's talk about mistakes, Denny. It's Joan's favorite topic, really. And later on in our time together as a group, I'm going to post a poem or two from a book called Errata Suite. Errata Suite.
Well, there's a famous quote by Miles Davis, no mistakes but opportunities, right?
Yes, let's riff on some more sayings. My grandfather used to say, "Hey, Al, come here. If you're not making a mistake, you're making a mistake." And that was my immigrant grandfather's way of saying to me, try stuff, Al. And clearly that's what she's doing here. So she is really interested in errors, because error leads you, pretty much every discovery that's ever been made by human Homo sapiens has been based on errors. So she's really interested. The passage you're referring to is not a building, this earth, not a cage. The artist, disciple, abundant, multiple, restless, a forgery. She got that from books she didn't like and was discarding. Damn. I wish I could make those kinds of mistakes. I wish I could write a poem based on stuff I didn't like instead of trying to write an academic book that's based on stuff that I admire. What if I actually based my next academic book on books that I disliked? Anyway, it's the possibilities are fecund. And the last line, and we're going to turn to Jennifer next. The last line is one of the most beautiful lines that I have ever come across in a poem. And it is the last line of one of the books she discarded. And it is, the most obscure things have already been said. That is probably, if you're looking for one line that embodied Joan Retallack's philosophy of art, it's that. The most obscure things, which is, all of her writing is very obscure and difficult, right? Everything has been said before. There's nothing new except for the arrangement. Jennifer Spector, what is your thought?
So many thoughts on this this poem that speak to not only poem talk, but the pieces that we read, especially ideas of porous borders and leaving official kingdoms of thought, domains of intelligibility that's understood and prescribed. And it really made me think of, in poem talk that we all listen to, or some of us have, so good, not quite done with it, but notices and arranges memory, which is what composing does. And she, I feel in this poem, like some have said in the chat here, that she's definitely playing, but she's doing serious play, because she's speaking to what Lynn also spoke to about the potential to contain, and our memory and our memoric kind of polyphonic adaptations that we make when we decide. We don't consciously decide what to remember, but our brain definitely doesn't contain everything that we've ever experienced, thought, or said, or felt. So I think in this poem, she's actually mimicking the discards that we consciously and unconsciously make. She's playing with chance, she's playing with randomness. And I think there's an emulation of cluster, kind of like an emulation of release and how we toss away and what we, if there's an intention to remember, then there's an intention to absorb and an intention to maybe discard. So I think there's kind of a play going on there with discard, memory, intention, absorption, and what it means, truly means to compose. And she's doing this with serious play. And I really love it because it's so generative. It's so, it's all about refuse and what's not important and what is important and how we consciously kind of move through that. So those were some of the things that it made me think of.
Really, really lovely. Thank you. That was great. I have one thought on that, and then I want to turn to Carla and then to Kathy, and then we'll offer up, some of us will offer up final thoughts for the evening. I think, I mean, Jennifer, what you said was great. And it makes me think that there are two ways to deal with the literary, the bookish past. One is libraries are obviously very important. They're our archive, but we all have personal archives. And I'm dealing with a member of my family who needs to get rid of everything because she's going into assisted living. And we're going through everything. And you've all been through it. It is so heartbreaking. It's exciting too, but there's no way you can do it easily because of course you take a box and you look through it and it reminds you of everything. I believe that this poem, interestingly, is a kind of recycling in the on garbage day, maybe you have a compost bucket and maybe you have your glass and your, aluminum cans and your paper separated from the stuff that's going in to the landfill. Recycling in that sense. I mean, she's getting rid of these books. In some ways, she's circulating them back in, but she's also retaining lines from them and making a poem that has now become almost canonical. Certainly in Modpo, it's a major poem for Modpo. So that generative is the right word. She's taking something, she's taking discards and turning it into a kind of conservation, but a playful random conservation, because she can't pretend to actually being, she can't pretend not to be throwing these things out. I just really liked it. There's an eco quality to this poem. Carla, and then Kathy. How you doing, Carla?
Really, really good. I really appreciate that you're doing this and that this is live and that it's not a webinar. So thank you 1,000 times
Sure.
for presenting everything in this way and having people be able to actually have a conversation with each other. It's wonderful. My question was, how is this poem different from a cento? It seems to me very much the same as a cento. And other than the fact that I didn't see where the lines are referenced,
Right.
but it seems very much similar to that.
Yeah.
And the title of the poem, I mean, this is the first time that I've really been introduced to Retallack, and I'm falling madly in love with her. Her playfulness and her humor in the way that she uses form, the way that she does line breaks, I could go on and on and on. It's inspiring and fabulous. And what she seems to be saying in the title of this poem, to me anyway, picking out that particular phrase for the title, is that form is not a cage, that the way that we write poetry is entirely up to our sense of play, up to our sense of creation, up to our imagination. So I will leave it there.
Wow, Carla, that was so fantastic. Form is not a cage. It's only a cage if you imprison yourself by saying, I've got to write a sonnet in a certain way, and that's a cage. But form, she invented the form, or as you suggest, she's sort of playing on the cento and other forms. But it need not be not liberating. Sorry for that complicated logic. It need not be not liberating. Form can be freedom.
Mhm.
That's if we think of nothing else from this conversation tonight, maybe let's remember that one. That's pretty great. That's pretty great, because there was a period of the 20th century when, if William Carlos Williams, if you showed him a traditional form, he would spit at it. It's got to be free. You've got to be free. And what he meant was free form. Amiri Baraka felt the same most of the time. I want to be free, he said. I don't want to respect any of the traditional forms. Well, she's not using form traditionally here at all. But it's not a cage. She is not caging herself. And of course, she's also saying, John Cage, I dedicate this poem to you, but it is not a cage.